Hello and welcome to a Week 11 edition of the Establish the Run Waiver Wire Show. My name is Adam Levitan. As always, joined on these Tuesday afternoons by John Daigle to discuss ads, drops, changing situations, the most important thing that could possibly be going on in the entire world, fantasy football waivers. Daigle, how's it going today?
Some may think we're becoming a company that instead critiques tight ends, significant others, but no, we're here to talk waivers and fantasy football with everyone.
All right. It's an interesting week, I think, on the waiver. As always, there's some guys at wide receiver that I think are interesting. There's also some changing running back situations here. And that's kind of where I wanted to start, Daigle. I think the big question everybody has is, how big should I go on Aundreese Estime? Is this Aundreese Estime stuff real? Has he completely iced Javonte Williams? If he has, how much value is there in that? You know, we got a ton of questions like this from Grassman, Ohio. He said, if I'm struggling big time at running back, is it unload the clip time for Aundreese Estime? My current RB2 is Javonte Williams. We got a ton of questions like that. So I have some thoughts on Denver running back situation. Daigle, what is your initial macro thought here on Estime, Javonte, McLaughlin going forward?
I think it's easier to unload the clip in 12 and 14 team leagues where running backs are already bare, where guys like Blake Corum, Trey Benson, even Cam Akers prior to last week have already been picked up because everyone's thinking farther ahead. In 10 team leagues, though, where there are still options you can pick up and start out there, I don't think Estime is necessarily a priority. He's probably going to be the cover image of every single waiver wire column out there, and I get it. But I'm definitely a little skeptical of his ceiling. If you look at our strength of schedule for running backs in terms of points allowed over expectation for the rest of the season, the Broncos have the sixth toughest remaining schedule, both heading into and in the fantasy postseason. And the type of player Estime is, for a running back to reach their ceiling, you really need them to also have a role in the pass catching game. And that's just not who he was at Notre Dame. A career 5.4% target share, 3 fumbles also going back into the preseason this year. Only 6 appearances in the NFL thus far, but he's benched twice already. And last week, whenever this changing of the guard happened, yes, great for Estime, a season high 82% of the team's backfield carries, but even Javonte Williams ran 9 routes to Estime's 7. So again, I'm skeptical, but in 12 and 14 team leagues, if you were that desperate, I understand why people would do it.
Yeah. So I think the big question for me is, will this ever become a true workhorse backfield? Will this ever become only 2 guys are going to get snaps and touches? Or maybe, God forbid, even one guy is going to get 80% or 75% of the snaps and touches. I think that's really unlikely, right? I don't know what you think, Daigle, but I think it's really unlikely that Sean Payton ever says, you know what, screw it, full-blown Aundreese Estime workhorse. Now, I do think that they like Estime. I've heard that they comped him to Marshawn Lynch, that in that like power back, base back role, and Javonte and McLaughlin can handle change of pace, passing game work. I feel like that's ideally how they want it to look. But anytime you're going to play 3 running backs on an offense where each week is going to be expected to score 2 touchdowns at the most, it's really hard for me to find the ceiling on Aundreese Estime. Now, that said, I don't want to poo-poo running backs off waivers who are starters. So I agree with Daigle that the ceiling is questionable here. When you're relying on touchdowns on a team that's probably not going to score a ton of touchdowns, that's a problem. But I do think that Estime will be ahead of Javonte on base at least going forward. So, yeah.
And I wrote in the waiver column that I would drop Javonte Williams for Estime wherever you have to make that choice. I think I'm fine with Estime being the back we want among Denver's runners the rest of the year. But I don't want to use the label league winner or anything like that because there's enough red flags here to make me think in 10-team leagues, we may have better starters anyhow.
Sure. And schedule next 2 weeks is pretty clean. I mean, home against the Falcons and then at the Raiders. They're going to have opportunity to score touchdowns there. Then they play Browns. As Daigle said, in the fantasy playoffs, they do have a game at the Chargers in week 16, which obviously is not ideal. But week 17, they do play the Bengals, and obviously that'll be a spot to get some touchdowns on the board too. So, yeah, I think it's I would agree with Daigle. It's probably overblown. The only other thing I'd say, Daigle, is what do you think about timing here? When people say unload the clip, I mean, we're entering week 11. I don't know about saving your money at this point, so what, just general strategy for waiver wire fab people. What do you think about saving it versus spending it these days?
In competitive 12 and 14 team leagues, $1,000 budget, I bet honestly he goes for 450, 550. I think we are getting very close to the time where we can't take it with us. And so it's time to just splurge it all on players like this. So again, where waiver wires are bare, I know in some of my 12 team leagues, I just looked it up before the show actually, and there's just no running backs available on deeper benches. Sure, I can imagine you just going all out, even if you have been sitting on $100 this entire time, 90, 95, totally okay with it. Because again, we're just trying to swing for the fences. I get it.
Okay. Let's stick with the running back and go to Gus Edwards. So we knew that only one of Gus Edwards or Kimani Vidal would be active for this game now that Gus Edwards was back healthy off of IR. I thought that it would be Gus Edwards because this staff obviously loves him. They knew him in Baltimore, etc. Now, I did not think that he would play as much as he did here in week 10. Gus Edwards got base carries and a lot of them ahead of J.K. Dobbins right out of the gate. Now, Dobbins still finished with 18 opportunities himself, but Gus Edwards was very much involved. The question to me is, will Gus Edwards be goal line back for this team, or is he just going to get 1st and 10 and 2nd and 8 from the 40, which isn't that valuable? So, Daigle, where you at on Gus Edwards right now? I'm sure he's available in way more leagues. In competitive leagues, I bet he was dropped a ton.
Dropped because of the month-long stint on injured reserve, most likely. And in this game, J.K. Dobbins handled his lowest share of the team's carries, 55%, since week 2, which is not surprising. The last time Edwards also received double-digit carries. Remember, Edwards was in that timeshare with Dobbins the first 2 games, and then due to his own inefficiencies, got put on the shelf as more of a backup option until he got injured behind Dobbins. My concern is that now Dobbins has already reached a career high 165 touches this year, whereas Edwards, although he was injured, he's coming back fresh. Only 49 touches under his belt because he's been absent. And this past game, he looked good with over 6 yards per carry. So I fear that it's going to be a much more closer to a timeshare the rest of the way. And if that's the case, then yes, Edwards can get there as a flex option who's cannibalizing Dobbins.
Yeah. I think ideally they want to have Dobbins in that 13 to 18 touch range or something like that. Maybe in competitive games, he gets a little bit more, but certainly with how many running back carries this team is capable, at least, of getting off, Edwards could be an option there as well.
We will always have the wheel route for Vidal in the back of our hearts.
Yeah. I mean, the staff was never just going to brush Gus Edwards to the side. Right. That was probably a bad take by me that they would ever just be like, you know what? Gus sucks, because they love him, and they're boomers and they love him. They don't throw guys like that to the sideline.
Well, this is why we also update the 1 injury away list and get guys even like Chris Rodriguez, who are behind Jeremy McNichols on it, because we can still adjust for players coming back and players out of that time. We had a month-long window and it just didn't work out for Vidal, but we took the chance and stashed him.
Okay. The last running back I want to talk about is Jalen Wright. Now, there was a lot of speculation because of the Raheem Mostert fumble that he would be benched behind Jalen Wright in this game on Monday. The way that it went was Jalen Wright did not play much at all, but he did get 5 carries to Mostert 0. I believe the snaps were 8 for Jalen Wright and 7 for Mostert, something like that. Achan got the rest. Daigle, where you at on Jalen Wright here as a waiver ad?
It's a situation where, like we saw Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard use this past week, where one of their floors got higher and the other's ceiling sank, but really no player is moving forward in that kind of situation. Now, since that third quarter fumble of the opening drive in week 9 that Mostert caused, his 6th fumble in the last calendar year, Wright has out-touched him 10-3. But in out-carrying Mostert 5-0 on Monday night, that does not take out the fact that Mostert was still used as their pass-catching back on 3rd down. And that's how he exploded over 40 receiving yards. And so what's happened is that they are now cannibalizing each other's touches, whereas Devon Achan is still the player with elite usage. So really, it's bad for Mostert. I think it's enough to where I will swap Wright for Mostert on waiver wires rest of season, or I should say Mostert for Wright on waiver wires rest of season. But I still don't have much faith either can be a standalone value right now, unless Achane is the one who's injured, because that's who they're trusting in every single aspect of the field.
Yeah. Okay. I like that take. Let's go to some of these wide receivers here. I thought one of the most interesting ones to me was Ricky Pearsall. He ran 30 routes on 40 something Brock Purdy dropbacks. That was third, but it was still a pretty good roll. And so I agree he's behind Debo. I agree he's behind Juwan Jennings. That doesn't mean that he can't get here, especially with George Kittle continues to battle some of these nagging injuries. He's got a hamstring thing now that's been nagging at him a little bit. So I like Ricky Pearsall as an ad. Just close your eyes, bet on talent. You never know what could happen to Debo or Juwan Jennings, who have also been banged up already this year. I get that maybe you don't want to start Pearsall if both those guys, if everybody's healthy with CMC, Kittle, and the two wide receivers in front, both healthy. But I still want to own Ricky Pearsall, I think, for sure. And honestly, I might want to start him in some good scenarios like we had against the Bucs this past weekend. Daigle, what do you think about 49ers right now? I assume Juwan Jennings is all added up and not available in enough leagues right now to be on this list.
And I still personally would take Cedric Tillman over Juwan Jennings. I wish I could guarantee everyone that Jameis Winston would start every week, but wherever those two players are hanging around, Tillman over Juwan, but you definitely want both of them, in my opinion, over every wide receiver still available right now. For Pearsall, it's like you said, I'm still concerned that it's not just four guys like last year with Ayuk, Debo, CMC, and Kittle. Pearsall's now the fifth option. And so what does that floor look like every single week? Amazing contingency value, because we now know if one goes out, he can easily step in and earn targets. This past game, a season high 17.6% target share. But Jennings definitely isn't going away in this Ayuk role. Like, we've already seen a 40% target share earlier this year, and now this past week, a team high 32% mark. And so I just worry about Pearsall's viability every single week. But yes, a first-round receiver, talent we definitely want, and one of the most elite offenses in the entire league.
Yeah. I think he should be owned almost everywhere at this point. And, you know, we have some bloated bye weeks coming up. You might need to start him too.
And I note in the waiver column, because people watching the video will see I have Mike Williams and Rashad Bateman ahead of him. I like Williams and Bateman as starts ahead of him this week, but I even note in Pearsall's blurb that long-term, if you're looking past week 11, I would pick up Pearsall instead.
Okay. The other long-term situation is this Colts stuff. So Michael Pittman did not practice at all last week, like took the week completely off, was inactive for the game. I have no idea how serious this is. I don't know if they just gave him the week off and said, come back healthy, or if they said, hey, listen, this guy's really banged up. He's going to be week to week here going forward. Either way, AD Mitchell played a really good game, caught all 6 of his targets, was out there for almost all the snaps. Alec Pierce's role was the same as it's always been. It's just there's more targets if Michael Pittman's going to be out. Daigle, how do you see Pierce and Mitchell off the wire this week?
And when you have a league high 22-yard depth of target and you're getting more targets, that's basically how you become George Pickens, is that you're no longer being forced to try to catch 1 to 3 coin tosses downfield. You're now getting 6 to 8. That's how you reach a ceiling. And so in leading the team in routes run this first game without Pittman, also leading in end zone targets, 44% of the team's air yards, Pierce is the player I prefer. But yes, I do wish I had a better timeline on Pittman, given that a couple weeks ago, that back injury sounded like it was seriously going to end his season. He comes back, he scores a touchdown playing through it, and now he misses every single practice. We just don't have any idea. I do have Pierce ahead of Estime, if only because if it all shook out with Pittman inactive, I would still start Pierce over Estime this week. But yes, I do like Mitchell too. Mitchell hasn't played much because he's still the team's 4th receiver. But when he has been out there, he's earned a target on 31% of his routes compared to Josh Downs' 37% target per route run rate. So the fact that he's not only in 3 wide sets without Pittman, but also we saw the first month of the year that when Josh Downs is not out, Mitchell's the one who slides into the slot. Like Pearsall, there's a lot of contingency value in rostering Mitchell as well.
Yeah. So my concern long-term on this is we're probably going to see Anthony Richardson again this season, right? Like, that's probably a really good bet that Richardson's going to get back. Flacco's been terrible the last 2 weeks. I feel like they might as well get Anthony Richardson back in there. I think most people around the team probably want Anthony Richardson to get back in there and get another shot. At that point, I mean, I'm not too interested in starting any of these guys, right? So, like, I don't want to go nuts on Colts guys if I don't need them long-term. Short-term as a streamer this week or whatever, totally fine with it. if Flacco stays in there, I like having AD Mitchell. I think they should and will get him looks down the stretch, maybe at the expense of Alec Pierce even. I mean, they know what they have in Alec Pierce. Let's say Pittman comes back, Daigle, and they're like, well, listen, we want to get longer look at AD Mitchell here and develop him more. How about we play AD Mitchell with Pittman and Downs in their 3 wide receiver set down the stretch? I mean, you suck anyways. Like that is a also option for me. So unless you need some immediate streamer, I kind of think maybe Mitchell over Pierce. But let's say you had Pittman, Daigle. How would you play this? Would you drop Pittman for Mitchell? Would you drop Pittman for Pierce, etc.?
I don't think I would drop Pittman for either of these guys just yet. I'm still hanging on to him since, again, we've seen at least one game where he can play through that injury and have success. But maybe that tune changes in a couple weeks. Again, we just don't have a timeline. And so we're just trying to think ahead on Tuesday.
Okay.
Move waivers to Wednesday. That's the answer for everybody.
Of course. The other wide receivers on this list for those guys watching, I think, are more interesting streamers, but we've talked about Bateman plenty. The Mike Williams did not play a lot. Certainly will play more going forward. But yeah, I wouldn't feel that comfortable starting Mike Williams. Daigle, any more thoughts on him? I guess he's one that we should hit on as one we haven't touched yet. Mike Williams is now a Steeler, makes a touchdown catch to win the game on Sunday, but barely played in that game.
Only 7 routes in that game. If it was any other defense but the Ravens, I would say I wouldn't be comfortable starting him. But buddy, the Ravens aren't stopping anyone. It's the perfect archetype of player to go against them as well. Russell Wilson now second, and his rate of pass attempts 20 yards downfield for a league best 53% completion rate. And we know that's where Mike Williams goes. So at least for this week, as I wrote in the column, I do think it's a terrific situation for him.
All right, a few more deep league options here before we move to your questions. Keaton Mitchell one is interesting. You know, he is very fast, got back from the injury this week, can make big plays. If something were to happen to Derrick Henry, I think there'd be some kind of timeshare between Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell. Dawson Knox is an interesting one. I haven't heard any about the severity of Dalton Kincaid's knee injury yet. If he were to miss, I think Dawson Knox would be an okay, like, back end touchdown or bust tight end streamer. And then we saw Jermaine Burton, redeem himself somewhat by at least getting on the field and being active for the Bengals last game. Those are the 3 most interesting ones to me here on this deep league list. Any thoughts on those guys, Daigle, or anybody else you want to highlight from the deep league waiver targets?
Lots, but to quickly touch on the ones you mentioned, Keaton Mitchell, just last year, remember, 8.7 yards per touch, and can do that like a poor man's version of Devon Achane without double-digit touches. Very clearly a player to roster over Justice Hill. We've seen the Justice Hill thing already. He's never going to win you your league or be predictable when to use him. So you swap him for Mitchell wherever that's possible. Jermaine Burton, a season-high route participation this past game. We are still waiting word on T. Higgins' status, but right now it does seem like Burton has gotten back in the good graces. 5 targets, only 1 catch I know, but like Alec Pierce, Burton is second in the league with an 18-yard depth of target. So if we're giving him more targets now without Higgins, that's a very good thing. And then Mac Hollins, also interesting because Keon Coleman already ruled out. We don't know if he's going to go on injured reserve, and we're still waiting word on Amari Cooper's status. Hollins still popped up with 80 receiving yards last week. Khalil Shakur, everyone talks about the catch rate, and that's awesome. He's been great after the catch. He also has literally the league's lowest depth of target. He's just used right near the line of scrimmage and then asked to gain yards after the catch. So Hollins is still their deep threat who's unimpeded as long as Dalton Kincaid is out there. And then I think the 2 other names to talk about, one, Kayshon Boutte, and that's how he pronounces it. I had to look it up for the show. Boutte did benefit from Gerard Mayo's changing of their wide receivers, healthy scratching Kendrick Bourne and promising to get the younger players more involved. And because of that, Boutte leads the Patriots in both target share and routes run. Seems to be an every down player now with Drake May. I still, wherever he's out there, I still want Demario Douglas over Boutte. Douglas now in his 3 full games that he and Drake May have finished together, he hasn't dipped below a 21.5% target share in any of those 3 contests. But it does seem like it's shaking out where Douglas and Boutte are the 2 Patriots wide receivers to give serious consideration in deeper leagues. And then finally, just because you can't break fantasy football then not be talked about, we all are aware you should be very skeptical of Marquez Valdes-Scantling. a career high 25.9 fantasy points, led the Saints wide receivers in routes run, but did so on only 3 targets, and it was still just a 67% route rate. Again, this is not something we want to necessarily chase, but given that we don't know when Chris Olave, if and when he'll be back, and the Saints have no other options to throw to outside of Alvin Kamara, you pick them up for a couple bucks and hope for the best.
Yeah. I feel like, in more casual leagues, people are going to overbid on MVS, but to be clear, I don't think Olave is going to play again this season. I hope he does, for his own health, but yeah, he might not. Bub Means and Cedric Wilson are both out too. I mean, it's just an absolute mess there. A couple other guys from the extreme deep. Davis Allen appears to have usurped Colby Parkinson. That's the situation I think worth monitoring. And then Cooper, I thought Cooper Rush would play better, man. I was wrong. He was awful. I mean, they got to see Trey Lance. And so Trey Lance can run, and he'll have CeeDee Lamb when he gets in there. If you need quarterback help, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, I do think Trey Lance should probably be rostered.
I don't think it's going to go well for Trey Lance, but we already saw in the preseason 24 carries, 168 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. So that's how we get there in Superflex leagues at the end of the year.
All right. A few questions here from Super Dave Hodge. He said, is Cordell Patterson a guy I want to own now? So this was a weird situation. Or not weird, but Najee Harris hurts his ankle. Jaylen Warren is playing well. Jaylen Warren comes in. He's about to score, like literally about to go into the end zone, coughs up the football and loses it. And obviously that sent Mike Tomlin through the roof. Najee Harris gets back into the game, even though he has this ankle injury, and appears to finish out the game. Some people told me it looked like he aggravated it again. I'm not sure. We're waiting for status on Najee Harris. If you had waivers tonight, though, Daigle, what do you think about Cordell Patterson as an ad?
I forgot to mention, because he's rostered in a majority of leagues, that I would also take Warren, regardless of Najee's injury, over Estime rest of season if you have that choice. For Cordell Patterson, I think he's just one of those guys that's considered a good stash, and we have him ranked in the 1 injury away list. But because all 3 have been injured, well, Najee hasn't been until now, but Patterson and Warren have been injured sporadically. So we haven't seen their backfield operate really when all 3 have been at full strength. But we do know the last few games without Patterson, they've really just leaned on only Najee and Warren in those contests have seen 14, 11, and 16 touches. I don't know if Patterson reaches that mark, but I bet we get 7 to 10 touches behind Warren if Najee's out. So certainly someone that I don't mind picking up who may have flex value, but also contingency value if Najee is injured long-term.
Kenny Powders 100 says, Dalton Kincaid and Jalen Waddle, are they droppable? So I hate these drop questions, man, because we don't know what's out there. We don't know what's on your team. We don't know how deep your league is, and then people come back and say, you told me to drop Mark Andrews, and now he's having, all these great games. It's like, A, the situation changed. Isaiah Likely was out. But B, like, if there was no one worth dropping Mark Andrews for, then I wouldn't have dropped him. So I hate these drop questions. In a vacuum, though, Dalton Kincaid hurt his knee in this game. Initially, they said that he was questionable return. He did come back, couldn't go on the knee. He was ruled out for the rest of the game. But the fact they let him actually come back on the field after it made me think that it's not that serious. So I don't think I'd drop Dalton Kincaid. Waddle, for me, is another conversation. I mean, dude hasn't had a good game in a very long time. That said, Tyreek Hill appears to be struggling with this wrist issue. Daigle, what do you think about Kincaid and Waddle right now?
We did get 6 targets last night, 57 receiving yards, finally, his highest mark since week 1 for Waddle. And he would have gone over 75 yards if he didn't drop that beautiful toss from Tua along the sideline. So I still have faith in Waddle. And yes, as you said, the drop questions always pertain to what's available. Like, for instance, earlier this year when Mark Andrews was on the drop list, it was because Tucker Kraft was available. And then recently, until the Jordan Love injury, Tucker Kraft was outscoring Mark Andrews. So we always just look at it from that angle. I don't think there's anyone on this list, Estime included, that I would drop Waddle for. I'd rather keep him. Kincaid, the best tight end, in my opinion, right now is Will Dissly. No. And I'm still a little bit concerned that Hayden Hurst may exist in that rotation. So I think I'd keep Kincaid.
Oh, definitely Kincaid over Dissly for me. I mean, yeah.
And
even though
Kincaid hasn't been good.
Yeah,
though.
I understand, but yeah, and I'm not even worried about Hurst, but like, the Dissly stuff is,
sure.
It's, well, you know what? Now that I think about it, it might not be as far apart as I think, but I think I'd still rather have Kincaid.
You have to think about it at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Donnie Berger says, should I drop Keon Coleman for any of the top waivers this week? So risk thing seems bad on Keon Coleman. It sounds like they're not going to put him on IR, which means they expect him back within the next 2 to 3 weeks. But I don't know. And Amari Cooper's going to be healthy at some point here too. What do you think about dropping Keon Coleman for anyone this week?
For anyone watching the video, I think I go down all the way to Ricky Pearsall. I would probably keep Coleman over MVS.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, but I would go down to Pearsall and take a chance since we think that we're stashing someone anyhow. Still skeptical of being able to use Coleman weekly when and if Cooper's at full strength.
Okay. Last one here from Cage Flight 137. He says, I clinched the playoffs
every week.
I have both. Shout out to you. I have both Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks. Continue to hold Brooks or drop him for other upside stashes such as Akers, Gus Edwards, or Dameon Pierce in half PPR. So I don't think Jonathan Brooks is ever going to have a workhorse role. I do think that he's going to play, though, and force some kind of timeshare here, get, I don't know, 6, 8 touches for the Panthers. How much is that really worth, though? I don't know. Daigle, what do you think about Brooks versus some of these one injury away guys?
And for anyone who listens to the rest of season show weekly, this is just a conversation we always regurgitate every single week about this stupid Panthers backfield. I think in his debut in week 12, Jonathan Brooks will simply take on Miles Sanders' touches. Sanders is only averaging 6 touches per game. Sanders was also injured this past week in Germany before their bye. I think that's the role he gets. Hubbard has done nothing to lose that role.
Yeah.
But also, Brooks is a elite stash because we've talked about the Panthers' fantasy playoff schedule. And if Hubbard were injured, forbid that. I don't want that to happen. But if he were injured, I'd look pretty stupid holding on to Brooks this entire time and then dropping him. So I think Brooks is a tier 1 stash. But would I take Akers over him? I think I actually would right now, based on Aaron Jones now suffering his 3rd separate injury this past week, only day to day with the rib injury. But he's also handling a career high 19 touches per game, and they don't really seem to be coming away from that at all. So down the stretch, I think Akers has a high probability of getting in there, if only because of Aaron Jones' injury history.
Yeah. The one thing I'd say about Akers is that if Aaron Jones does go down, I think we'll see Ty Chandler get back in the mix. You know, maybe it's 60-40 Akers, something like that. And same with Gus Edwards. If J.K. Dobbins went down, I think we'd see 60-40 Edwards Vidal. If Mixon went down, Daigle, you might get full workhorse Dameon Pierce. I don't know what you think about all that.
I agree, but also we don't know Dameon Pierce's status since he's been injured the past 2 weeks. Yeah. And that's why they've had to use Dario Gumbawale instead. So if I could guarantee Pierce will be healthy, I would 100% agree. Remember, they healthy scratched Cam Akers as well the last time Pierce was at full strength before trading him. But we don't know Pierce's status right now.
All right. That is going to do it for your week 11 look at the waiver wire. I will be back with Silva later tonight for Team by Team, and then me and Daigle will be back with Jack and Mark on Wednesday for rest of season top 150 rankings show. If you're watching this on YouTube, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button. You'll be alerted anytime new videos do indeed go live. For Daigle, producer Ryan, producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.